Some people aren't heartless. They've simply learned to close the gates around their emotions, not by some random twist of fate, but as a conscious and necessary survival tactic. They didn't just drift into distance or suddenly become unreadable for no reason. They didn't wake up one day and decide that silence was easier. They were pushed into it by the emotional chaos they once willingly embraced. They once had hearts wide open, like windows with no curtains, letting every storm blow through them. They gave endlessly, listened without limits, and stretched themselves thin just to be there for others. They were the safe harbor for everyone else's pain, the quiet container for other people's storms, holding griefs that didn't even belong to them. Their own emotions were always placed second, buried beneath the urgency of someone else's need. But over time, this constant emotional exposure began to tear them apart. The weight of being everyone's rescue story slowly wore away at their own sense of self. Being so available started to feel like self-neglect dressed up as compassion. The calls they never ignored, the emotional labor they constantly performed, the spaces they filled even when empty themselves, all of it drained them in silence. And so, little by little, they started to pull back, not out of bitterness, but out of burnout, because being present for everyone had become a slow erasure of their own presence. They saw how easy it was for people to take their softness for granted, how emotional generosity became expected, not appreciated. So they made the quiet decision to retreat, to become less reachable, to stop sacrificing themselves on the altar of someone else's comfort. Not because they lost their ability to care, but because they finally realized how much it was costing them to constantly prove it. Emotional unavailability is rarely born from indifference. It's often the camouflage worn by a soul that has been bruised too many times to stay exposed. It is not apathy, but armor. A quiet defense mechanism built from years of overextending, overgiving, and being met with silence, betrayal, or emotional emptiness in return. It's the residue left behind by promises broken and trust mishandled. It's what remains when someone has poured themselves into people who only knew how to take. Somewhere along the way, the open-hearted version of them began to fade, not because they stopped caring, but because caring without boundaries kept cutting them open. They learned that the world isn't always kind to those who feel deeply. That vulnerability, in the wrong hands, becomes ammunition. That empathy can be twisted, used, and exploited by those who never intended to give anything back. So they stopped offering themselves so freely. They stopped handing over their inner peace just to meet someone else's chaos. And this retreat wasn't born from bitterness or revenge. It was born from clarity, from finally recognizing that being emotionally available to everyone is a form of self-abandonment. They came to understand that love, compassion, and support must be mutual to be healthy. So they started locking doors, not to shut the world out, but to keep their spirit intact, to protect their sanity, to guard the last remnants of a heart that has been too generous, too unguarded, for far too long. Carl Jung's philosophy of individuation sheds profound light on this process. He believed that the journey to becoming a whole, authentic self demands stepping away from the noise, from the endless opinions, expectations, and emotional entanglements that drown out your inner voice. He emphasized that true transformation doesn't happen in the spotlight. It begins in solitude. It begins when a person chooses to conserve their psychic energy, to stop pouring their essence into situations that leave them drained, and instead direct that energy inward like a sacred fire, not to vanish from the world, but to reawaken to their truest nature. In this light, emotional unavailability is not avoidance, it's refinement. The emotionally unavailable person is not running from others. They are returning to themselves, peeling back the layers of who they were taught to be in order to uncover who they've always been. Their silence isn't a void, it's a crucible. It's where pain is melted down and reshaped into clarity, where impulsive reactions are tempered into thoughtful observation, where old wounds stop festering and start informing a deeper wisdom. This isn't detachment out of coldness, it's sacred detachment, the kind that brings a person back into alignment with their own truth. They're not lost. They are in the middle of becoming, and that's exactly why their presence carries a different weight. It's not loud, but it lingers. They don't chase attention. They don't feel the urge to correct misunderstandings or speak just to fill silence. They no longer seek to be heard by those who once ignored their voice or dismissed their depth. Their energy doesn't shout, it resonates, because they've transcended the need to justify their worth in spaces that once made them question it. They've grown past the desperate scramble for validation from people who couldn't recognize the strength behind their sensitivity. Now, they know that real power isn't in how forcefully you speak, it's in how peacefully you exist. True strength is the quiet assurance that you don't need to explain your silence, because your presence alone already says enough. It's the common knowing that stillness doesn't mean absence, it means self-possession. It's understanding that there is nothing to prove when you finally feel complete within yourself. If you've ever encountered someone like this, someone who doesn't open up easily, who keeps their emotions tucked behind quiet eyes, you might assume they're cold, detached, or disinterested. But that surface impression can be deceiving. Look a little deeper, and you'll find someone who's learned to be intentional with their emotional investments. Someone who's grown tired of handing out vulnerability like candy, only to have it trampled by those who didn't know how to hold it. They're not being difficult, they're protecting peace. They no longer volunteer their soul to people who respond with noise, confusion, or disregard. They've chosen stillness over performance, boundaries over burnout. They've stopped offering explanations to those who twist their words, and they've stopped showing up for chaos dressed as connection. What you're witnessing isn't arrogance, it's self-respect in its purest, quietest form. What they've come to realize isn't just important, it's sacred. Your emotional energy isn't infinite, and giving it away carelessly is a form of self-neglect. They've learned that emotional access is a privilege, not a right. It's not something to be handed out simply because someone demands it, cries for it, or guilt trips you into offering it. Once this truth settles into your bones, everything shifts. You stop picking up calls that drain you. You stop showing up to conversations that leave you feeling smaller. You no longer rush to clean up messes that others continue to create. You stop holding fractured connections together with your bare hands. Because you finally understand, your well-being isn't worth the price of forced loyalty. You choose self-preservation over performance, peace over people-pleasing, and boundaries over burnout. You've also absorbed one of the hardest truths Carl Jung ever revealed, that the world is full of masks, and most people never take theirs off. People don't always see you as you are. They see you as a mirror reflecting the parts of themselves they refuse to confront. Their judgments, their assumptions, their projections, none of it is truly about you. The emotionally unavailable person has peeled away their own mask, not to become distant, but to become honest. And once you've tasted that kind of truth, it's impossible to return to the artificial rituals of emotional performance. They no longer play the game of forced smiles, scripted empathy, or shallow connection. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's a refusal to entertain what's fake. Their distance isn't a wall, it's a filter, one that keeps out anything that threatens their peace. They're not avoiding connection, they're choosing authenticity over pretense, clarity over confusion, and truth over temporary comfort. They've let go of the need to justify their boundaries. They no longer feel obligated to soften the edges of their choices just to keep others comfortable. The emotionally unavailable person doesn't offer disclaimers or soften their no with excessive apologies. They've outgrown the urge to over-explain why they're protecting their peace. When someone says, "You've changed," they now recognize it for what it is, a quiet confession that you're no longer bending to meet their expectations. What used to be seen as distance is now a declaration of self-respect. And that shift, that unapologetic return to the self, isn't something to mourn. It's a rebirth. It's not the loss of connection. It's the beginning of a life where connection is no longer bought with self-abandonment. This form of detachment doesn't come from a place of bitterness or resentment. It's born from the wisdom of experience, from the painful yet enlightening journey of self-discovery. It's the recognition that peace, true peace, often disrupts the lives of those still trapped in chaos. But for the emotionally unavailable person, this disruption no longer carries weight. They've shed the need for universal approval, no longer seeking validation from those who don't understand their transformation. The need to explain their inner world has vanished. What matters now is alignment, staying true to their evolving self, no longer swayed by the demands or judgments of others. They know that peace is a privilege that comes with shedding the heavy burden of constantly explaining who they are and why they are changing. And in this new state of being, they've found freedom. You'll observe that they no longer chase closure as they once did. The need for external validation, for emotional reactions from others to confirm their feelings, has faded. They've arrived at a place of profound self-trust, where the absence of noise, the quiet hum of their own thoughts, feels more secure than any spoken explanation. In their silence, they've discovered a strength far greater than any words could offer. Letting go has become a source of power, a deliberate act of releasing the weight of unresolved emotions. Holding on, once a familiar instinct, now feels like an unnecessary burden. In the same way, choosing not to respond isn't a sign of weakness, it's an assertion of inner strength. They've learned that in not retaliating, they reclaim their energy, and in doing so, they preserve their peace. Their emotional unavailability is not a form of rejection. It's a protective boundary, an energetic shield. It's a clear message that their peace, their emotional well-being, is no longer up for grabs. Their feelings are not commodities to be toyed with, and their heart is not a playground for others to leave their footprints. Not everyone deserves a seat at their emotional table, and they've learned to guard that space fiercely. If this seems harsh or unyielding, it's only because society has conditioned us to equate self-sacrifice with kindness. We've been taught that constantly giving of ourselves, without consideration for our own needs, is virtuous. But the truth is, true kindness to others begins with kindness to yourself. And so, they've chosen to honor their boundaries, understanding that maintaining their peace requires them to say no. To those who would drain it, they've come to realize that protecting their energy isn't an act of rudeness. It's an essential practice for their well-being. Saying no is no longer seen as an act of selfishness, but as a deeply sacred gesture of self-respect. They understand that distancing themselves from emotional manipulation is not an expression of coldness, but rather an act of profound courage. It takes unparalleled strength to walk away from environments that drain your spirit, to resist the pull of negativity and toxicity. It requires a significant amount of personal growth to remain composed and silent in situations that once rattled them to their core. It takes an extraordinary level of self-awareness to understand that healing doesn't come with accolades or applause. It is an intimate, quiet process that thrives in solitude and stillness. They've learned that their emotional sovereignty is worth far more than any external recognition or validation. It's not a petty act or a desperate cry for attention. It's not a form of punishment or retaliation against anyone. It's an intentional act of self-preservation. They are quietly reclaiming fragments of their soul that were once scattered through endless people-pleasing and over-functioning, through trying to meet everyone's expectations while sacrificing their own needs. They've realized that their worth is not something that needs to be constantly proven or validated by others. The truth has become clear to them. Worth is not something you earn by overexerting yourself to fit others' demands. It is something you own through unwavering self-respect, through recognizing your own inherent value without needing to seek approval from outside sources. Their withdrawal is not a rejection of others. It is an affirmation of their own boundaries and a commitment to honoring their inner peace. And in this sacred silence, something profound happens. A new version of them begins to emerge. It's a version that no longer feels the need to apologize for taking space to heal and recharge. A version that refuses to shrink or contort itself just to be more palatable to others. A version that no longer chases love, especially the kind that requires begging for validation. This is what individuation looks like in its raw, unfiltered form. It's not always graceful or filled with grandeur. It's not always wrapped in beauty or soft words. Sometimes, it's a quiet act of removing people from your life without a dramatic announcement, simply because you've recognized their energy no longer aligns with your growth. Sometimes, it looks like walking away from conversations mid-sentence, no longer wasting time in spaces that drain your soul. Sometimes, it's about unfollowing people on social media who once seemed indispensable, because you've come to understand that your emotional landscape is yours to curate. It's saying, "I'm done," and meaning it, with the full weight of knowing that releasing the past is essential to step into a future that truly belongs to you, that they've willingly tuned into a new wavelength. One where the steady hum of inner calm drowns out the desperate plea for approval. In this realm, the quiet sanctuary of solitude feels richer than any hollow gathering, and genuine presence must be earned through respect and reciprocity, not simply handed out. As you settle into this rhythm, You begin to sense how exhausted your former self was, constantly chasing reactions, scrambling for acknowledgement, tilting toward chaos like a moth to a flickering flame. Now, you find yourself less drawn to the flashing distractions of drama and more enthralled by the steady glow of your own centeredness. You learn that being on all the time is a burden, whereas stepping back grants you the space to breathe deeply, think clearly, and choose connections that actually nourish you. In this quieter existence, you notice the difference between noise and meaning, between reaction and intention, and you realize you're too invested in your own wholeness to ever crave the old frenzy again. If you found yourself speaking less and observing more, noticing that your heart now beats to its own rhythm rather than the insistence of others, understand this. You are not falling apart, you're unfolding. This isn't a fracture in your spirit, but a metamorphosis into someone wiser. You're not shutting down emotion, you're conserving it, directing your compassion only toward what truly nourishes you. You're not drifting away from people, you're charting a new course towards self-reliance, choosing relationships that honor your depth instead of draining it. Your choice to hold back your availability is not a defect to be fixed, but a declaration of self-worth. It proves you finally recognize that your soul is far more precious than a momentary distraction. Cherish this evolution. Celebrate your unavailability as the sacred space in which your true self can flourish. Then treasure your silence like a sanctuary, an inviolable refuge where your thoughts can breathe without interruption. Safeguard your psychic vitality as if it were the world's rarest treasure, refusing to let it slip through cracks of distraction or the demands of others. Welcome the hush that rises when you step back from the clamor, for in that stillness you discover layers of yourself you never knew existed. In an era when everyone expects your every moment, your attention, your reaction, your approval, choosing to become unavailable is a radical act of self-preservation. In a society that prizes spectacle over substance, standing firm in your authenticity shines like a beacon. While the world confuses volume with value, your restrained presence speaks more truth than any shouted argument. Your quiet self-respect is its own kind of roar, reverberating through the spaces you refuse to fill with noise. By holding your ground in silence, you send a clear message. Your peace is non-negotiable, your inner world sacred, and your worth unquestionable. Let this be your stand, that not every invitation deserves an answer, not every crisis deserves your intervention, and not every person deserves a seat at the table of your heart.